So I alluded to the fact that this is a different conversation than we typically do on the show. If you listen to the program, you know we start at the beginning of somebody's life and we walk through how they grew up, where they grew up, all of that kind of stuff. And Esua and I didn't really get to that. We talked a little bit about her growing up, but there was a lot of discussion about race and class and gender, and really lots of musings back and forth just about our personal philosophies and sort of how we came to feel the way we did. So there is some of that traditional writer's jam stuff. But we had one of those pre-calls that lasted like 2.5 hours. And so this conversation you're going to hear is almost a continuation of that. And by the way, we chatted a little bit off air when we finished as well, because there is something about two people who see each other that you sort of skip past some of the details of life, which is why I really want to have her back on the program, because her life is so fascinating. And you can obviously read about it in the book as well. But you hear lots of people talking about needing to do the work, right, around race and class and gender and identity. You will hear people say, particularly to white folks, like, you need to go do the work on your own. And part of the reason Esua and I had the conversation that we had is that in some ways I've done some of the work around the areas where she's done her work. Obviously, without knowing that was not a thing. But this conversation evolved so naturally, and we just both kept saying, like, this is so weird that we are just able to jump in and sort of understand each other because the background that we have is so similar. She obviously, this is her life's work, so she's done way more work on it than I have. But there is a certain amount of this work that I've done as well. And I thought that it was really important to have this conversation because it's very easy to want to make change. It's very easy to want to be involved in making change. But there's also, I've been having all of these conversations offline, primarily with my day job, as I do work around diversity and inclusion, particularly working with people that are working on that, since I'm a publisher, and getting them to write about that. And I have these same kinds of conversations because this stuff has always been very important to me, particularly around race and class. I have so many blind spots, it's ridiculous. So I'm not saying that even the work in that is done, but there comes an ease in that conversation once you begin to do that work, reading, going out and experiencing things that aren't yours, making friends with people who look and sound different than you, spending time in those spaces, listening, all of the stuff, right? Like all the things that you sort of do naturally in your life as it is, and just going into places where you don't normally do that. So Esua and I just had this lovely conversation about that. And this isn't applauding that I've done a little work in this area, none of that. But I have to acknowledge that I have done some of that work, and that's okay to have done that. To know that there's way more work to be done. To know that I still have lots of blind spots that are out there. That I try to hear them when people point them out, and then try to figure out, okay, well, how do I go do that work so that we can have these conversations all over the place. And we alluded to it at the end of our conversation today, that it's so beautiful when that happens, when you do the work. Your life gets so much bigger when you do that, because suddenly you can see people in the spaces they're in. And I know just from my own life, and I've told this story on the program before, but when I worked at MIT, most of the people that were on the executive team outside of me were educated at private schools and all of that stuff. And I was running the web department. I was the youngest person on the executive team, and I was running the web department. I got this accent. I did an interview in a cowboy hat and a black leather jacket and cowboy boots. So I was always sort of somebody that they weren't exactly sure about. And my boss, at one point, when there was talk of me being promoted to vice president, said in a meeting that I didn't have the pedigree for that, to which I had to remind him that I was not a dog. And that is one of those stories that has stuck with me for the last 15 years. God, it's been 15 years now. It seems like yesterday. That when I think about why it's important for people like me, for white folks, for everybody really, to do the work to see other people, that's the place I always go. It's not the first time that happened to me. And it's not even the most egregious thing in the whole world, right? Like, I can only experience empathy through my tapping into my emotions. And I just remember that day, how angry and small I felt. More anger than small, but also you don't feel seen when somebody refers to you as a dog. And so it's always been really important for me to use, books and reading and things like that to try to grow that world so that I can meet people in places where they are, so that I don't ever do that. And obviously, like everybody else, I have done that. And I've probably done it, more than my fair share, just because I was a bull in a china shop for a really long time in my life because of my own pain and my own trauma. And I can't go back and fix any of that. All I can do is acknowledge that that was a thing that happened and now try to figure out how to be better going forward. So Esua and I really just kind of got into the importance of this stuff. And it was so joyous to talk to somebody and be in that sort of level where they were, and we both sort of saw each other, and we just kind of enjoyed that conversation. And I think you will too. I hope you will too. And I really hope that you will read her book, The Space Between Black and White.